Hey Q&A listeners, great to have you here. We've got Melissa back. Woo!
Yeah.
Great to have her. And we had the question last week that specifically referred to a mom, and we had 3 males on.
Yeah.
And so that was probably not the best way to handle that question. We said it'd be great to have Melissa back, and poof, here she is. So we've got her in. We always love her wisdom, but especially we need a female perspective on this one. So why don't we start right off with that one? If you weren't here or didn't tune into last week's podcast, the question reads: any suggestions on how to get through the ever-growing rage I feel towards my children? They push and push and push, and now that it's never-ending with no breaks, I don't have the time and space I need to recharge without them in my face constantly. I hate the mom I'm becoming when I'm so easily triggered, but I just don't know what to do when it just eventually boils up and pours out on them.
Oh, yes. I listened to this last week and I thought that you guys offered some great counsel on that as far as trying to find things that recharge you that are not just an escape. Because I know it's easy at the end of the day to just be so done and be like, oh, I'm just going to put on like something funny and stupid for 20 minutes to just like laugh and relax. But I know that may help me unwind, but it doesn't necessarily fill up my soul or refresh my spirit. And you guys talked about, I think, talking to someone about it, right? And I think that is huge. Even writing the question, but actually being able to talk to a friend or a pastor who knows you, who you feel safe with, to say, who isn't going to judge you and go like, oh, you really are, you should get some online counseling or something, who will be honest and say, we have all been there when we're just losing our patience and we're not the parent that we want to be. We're not our best self right now. Because most of us don't have the things that we're used to that help us recharge or get breaks. We can't get babysitters easily. Can't even, unless you live with your extended family. Most of us aren't seeing our extended families right now. So it is just really hard. And I feel like someone talked about confession in last week's Q&A. I don't know if it was in context to this question, but I had a conversation with a friend yesterday where I was just able to talk really honestly about the challenges in my own life right now, and when I just lose my patience or just feel worn out. And it's good to be able to say, oh, these are all the things that are just adding up to the point where I feel like I'm just done. But also, in a sense, to confess, oh, and I lost my patience. And to have someone who will listen compassionately, understandingly, and yet, even if she doesn't say anything, I know that she is prayerfully interceding for me towards God's best, because she and I both know that me just losing it at the kids and losing my patience isn't God's best for any of us.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think confession, when we know that we've crossed a line in our own anger management or patience levels, I think you guys mentioned apologizing to our kids, and that's great to do. Sometimes we all need a minute, and I think, Doug talked about stepping back and just calming down. And sometimes, if the bathroom is the only place you can lock yourself in for a minute, just taking that time out to go, like, I can't see you right now, just give mommy a minute. Having a minute to just, even if you need to put your face in a pillow and just let out the steam, and then to say to God, like, okay, I'm sorry. I know that's not the kind of mom you want me to be to these kids.
Yeah.
And just like, God help me prayers, right? I had a moment yesterday where I was losing my patience. It was a DIY thing, but my children were in the vicinity and I was trying not to swear under my breath and just going, oh, Jesus, I need your help with this. Because it was just the end of the day, and like, amazingly, things began things went a bit smoother, and I was able to fix my greenhouse, which was the issue at hand, without introducing my children to language I don't want them to repeat. So I think that confession, like to God, but also being able to say to someone you trust, ugh, like, I blew it, and like, that's not the mom I want to be. Someone who'll just listen compassionately, but to verbally say out loud, yeah, like, that's not where I want to be going. and then asking God to help us and taking those timeouts when you can. And just to say, I relate. I love my kids, but I knew from an early age that I wasn't going to be a primary teacher. Or, when women going through Bible college, the degree that I did, most women went into either kids ministry or worship ministry. And I just knew that I probably wasn't going to cut it in worship ministry, and I had no desire to do full-time children's ministry, even though I think children are beautiful, they're miracles. I love my children. I even love other people's children in small doses. Yeah. So, it is hard, and I relate. And I think that anger can be a combination of or just the result of so many things. But I think our unmet needs, and then maybe when our expectations don't align with reality. So I would encourage you, moms, to figure out, and if you do have a partner or someone who can help you figure out what are the deepest needs of yours that aren't being met. Is it sleep? Is it just half an hour by yourself in the day? Is it some exercise? I know for me, exercising can really burn off some stress, and I have more patience when I have exercised. What are the basic needs that aren't being met of yours, and is there anything you can do to shift life to meet them? I would love to have 2 hours by myself every day, but that just is not happening. If I can get up before all of them in the morning, that's the only time I have to myself, and I'm not doing that great lately at getting enough sleep to get up before them. So I feel you.
Yeah.
But the other thing, maybe just on a practical level, is just adjusting expectations to reality so that we're not frustrated. So yesterday, I took an easier school day with the kids. So I can be pretty task oriented. And when the teachers send their learning plans, I'm like, okay, we got to get through these things. And yesterday I went, you know what, we'll do this and this. And at about 10:45, we were just kind of done. And the kids went outside and talked Pokemon cards with the neighbor kid over the fence. And we just took a chiller day. So maybe if there's something that you enjoy doing with your kids that your kids enjoy too, give yourself permission to just do that, to try and take a day where you think, what do I enjoy doing with my kids? How can I just enjoy my kids today? And sometimes I think finding that ability to enjoy our kids again and have them enjoy us can just inject a bit of grease into the wheels of parenting.
I think there's some good stuff there, Melissa. I enjoyed you speaking about peer-to-peer, because I think that can be super helpful, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, the confession to the kids, we should do that. That's good. But I don't know that it's going to get rid of our frustration, right?
Totally.
It's just that's, the right thing to do. But when I can talk to a peer and say, hey, are you feeling the same way I am? They can validate that, and they can also hold us accountable, right?
Yeah.
So I like that. I appreciate that a lot. And I think also with the school stuff, I don't want to talk out of line because I'm not a teacher and I'm not necessarily at home with young kids trying to teach them. But I think what you said too, just realizing you don't have to be on task every minute of every day like that. That's unrealistic for anyone, right?
Yeah.
And I think we feel the pressure to do that because we get the list from the teacher.
Yeah.
But I think if you talk to teachers, they would even say there's just days where your students are nuts.
Yeah.
And,
Right.
It's a movie day in school that day.
Well, and I remember even my teachers taking us outside for some classes and stuff. And we thought it was awesome, but thinking to it now from an adult perspective, I'm sure the teacher was just like, we need to do this, right?
Dodgeball day when the teacher's involved is clearly they're getting their frustration out.
So maybe that helps, having the permission not to have to stay on task, having the permission to not having to be with my kids every 2 seconds. And that can be a hard dynamic right now, but figuring out how to do that, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you, Melissa.
One thing that I was thinking of too, talking about the anger piece, and maybe I'm jumping back in. It's like a second chance to talk about this question again. But for me, I've been thinking regularly too of we're not told not to be angry. I think that's okay, and we see that in Jesus.
Yeah.
Right.
But I think it's directing them at the right things, and I think giving us that outlet. You talked about exercise is a great outlet to have. I think maybe channeling our anger towards coronavirus as a whole instead of towards our kids and trying to turn that anger at certain points, I think is really beneficial. I think Jesus is angry at coronavirus. I think he hates it. I think he hates death and sickness in all of its forms.
Yeah.
And so if I can get in those moments where I'm angry at my kids, try to a little bit, and I know this is much easier said than done, turn my anger towards this stupid virus again is just ruining everything, versus my kids just won't listen. And I think if we can channel those things at the right anger, be angry, but in your anger do not sin, is what we're told, put it towards the right things. And Jesus being angry with the complete ruining almost of the temple system and how things were wrong when people were selling and trying to make money off it, keeping people from worship. He put his anger towards the idea, not towards even necessarily the specific people or even the people that were messing it up. I see a lot of that. He's just frustrated with the system. I think if we can direct our anger well and the right things can be beneficial as well. Yeah.
Good.
All right, then we'll jump to our other questions here. So first one, in Acts 2:46, it says that every day, also, by the way, that's where our 246 group's titles came from.
Yes, it
in Acts 2:46 says that every day believers continued to meet in the temple courts. Was meeting in the temple courts every day a normal practice for a Jew? Considering they were now under a new covenant, why did they keep meeting at the Jewish temple? Great question.
That is very good. I'll jump in with an uneducated answer and then let you guys who are more educated. I think probably we can assume that there was people in the temple courts all the time. I don't know that it would be a normal practice for a Jew to show up at the temple court every single day. I think this verse, in my understanding, this is new. The people are very excited about this new thing that Jesus has done. They have the Holy Spirit. Things are happening. So when you're excited about something, naturally you do it a lot. And I think they were just excited about being together with other believers.
Right.
So that was a natural place to congregate. And then the place, I'll defer to you guys, there is a shift at some point where Christians are not welcome in the temple courts anymore, right? That does happen.
Yeah, that started to grow the more church became popular, until 300 AD, when Constantine takes over and makes it the official religion of Rome, right? And so there was a lot of animosity between the Christians and the Jews. At first it was like, what's this little sect?
Yeah.
And then, these guys are gaining power and they're a threat. Now, we see a lot of that in Jesus, but for the whole movement as a whole into the diaspora, is that the right way of pronouncing it? Diaspora, there you go.
Yeah.
The Jews spread out. It was these small, tiny pockets amongst the rest of the Jewish people that weren't a big threat. From my understanding, though, the meeting every day was a pretty common thing for a certain devout portion.
Okay.
And I think thinking of church very differently in our current terms is part of what contributes to that. I have a lot of Catholic friends who go to Mass every single day, or at least 3 or 4 times a week, to a short Mass, or will go to the church and light a candle or something like that just as a regular routine, thinking of church to only be a service or temple to only be when the whole synagogue met is very different compared to our view of church today. And so there's a lot of just popping by to make this is my moment of the day and then go. And I think that's actually pretty common in most Eastern religions, to go to a temple quick at some part of a day. And so I think the devout, and I think to be a Christian at this time especially, you had to be devout. And therefore I think there would be a correlation between somebody becoming a Christian, having to be extremely devout, and therefore wanting to meet daily at the temple would have been a common, or at least made sense in that trajectory, is where I'll end mine.
And those were the only, the question, why did they keep meeting at the Jewish temple if they were under a new covenant?
Yes.
I mean, this was very earliest days of the church. They hadn't yet had to, because you see in Paul's letters as he's writing to people like the early church in its first 10, 15, 20 years.
Yeah.
They were still working out the difference between New Covenant, Old Covenant. That wasn't immediately obvious to them. Yeah. Jesus was the Messiah that they've been expecting. There was continuity with their faith, with their Jewish heritage at that point. Yes, he replaced the law, and so they weren't bound by these things. But that working out came over time. And Paul is having to explain, look, you don't have to get circumcised anymore. This is not where we find the evidence of our faithfulness, that kind of thing. But also, if they wanted a communal place to meet, that was the only place that they had, because they had the other, there were pagan temples or places of worship around, but if they wanted a place of worship that was, sanctioned and that the Romans would leave them alone, the Jewish temple would have been it, right?
Yeah, I think, yes, looking back, probably, the new covenant was a really new thing. And although it wasn't, worshiping a new God, it was new enough that they probably could have had their own place, and it would have been new and different than what was practiced in the Jewish temple. But they just, like you said, Melissa, they didn't know that yet, or it
Yeah.
just wasn't a thing, right? So
Yeah. I did read 2 books recently that were very much from a Jewish perspective. One was Bearing God's Name by Carmen Imes. She's actually in Three Hills, Albertan.
Oh, nice.
Cool to talk about her. And then another one, The Misunderstood Jew, talking about Jesus and his view. And it brought a lot of the covenant talk together, where there wasn't a new covenant from a lot of people's perspective, a lot of
No.
the Jewish perspective.
Yeah.
And she clarifies a lot of even Paul's language, where he's separating that we're not living under the law and all those pieces, was actually more a cultural thing for the Jews and Gentiles, more than it was saying for the Jews to get out of it.
Yeah.
The way he viewed it was that at least the way these books laid it out, that Paul would have seen it, was that the Jewish people were always supposed to continue in the covenant that God had created for them. But that the Gentiles didn't need to convert to Judaism. The promise even from Abraham was, you're going to be a blessing to all nations, and all nations are going to worship Yahweh together. But it wasn't an amalgamation of all nations. It was each nation was going to worship Yahweh from their perspective. And so that when this new covenant was one that shifted how Jews saw the fulfillment of everything, but that the Gentiles wouldn't have to become Jewish. And that's why Paul's so clear that you don't have to get circumcised. You don't have to stop doing these things, because God wants you to worship from your culture and from your covenant, versus this early demographic is almost 100% Jews continuing on.
Yeah.
And so they're seeing the fulfillment of their covenant, not a new and separate one. I've heard there's a guy, what book was it? I think it was in Jesus' Theography. Might have been where he refuses to call it Old and New Testament. He calls it First and Second Covenant, is what he calls the 2 books, because it was a continuation. And so I think it would have been normal. It wasn't all of a sudden that we need to break with this.
No.
But this is the next level of what we've been experiencing. So going to temple would have been normal, and meeting there would have been normal, because that's where they saw it was supposed to be taking place.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, then I'll jump to our next question. A question from my 15-year-old. What does God want us to do in heaven? We're supposed to tell others about Jesus on earth, but when we get to heaven, we all believe. So what do we do there? Important to know. The kid does not like music or singing, so praising Jesus is not an answer that flies with him. And sweating emoji.
You're not going to float around on clouds and play harps? Is that the...
Count me out. That is it. I'm not interested. Yeah. Any one of us can. So why don't we break it in? What does God want us to do from heaven, and the whole idea of spreading our faith? Is an important one. I'll still say this. I think there's going to be a large level of individualism. I don't think we're going to all amalgamate into some uniform being that is going to happen. And so I think there's going to still be a unique expression of the goodness of God from each person. Wayne Grudem, I used to say Grudem because I had it wrong for years. I listened to him do a perspective through his whole book. What's the book called? It's like his big textbook, Systematic Theology. He did a podcast that was him walking through his book, through his church, and he talked about heaven for probably 3 or 4 weeks in a row. And he talked about how heaven's going to be this creation restored, but each culture is going to remember what it was like on earth, and so you'll have infinite time to learn how to view and express worship to Yahweh through each culture. So he talked about this amalgamation in New Jerusalem of like, there'll still be Chinatown, and there'll be Thai town, and there'll be all these things. So now you can learn how to cook and use the flavors of what God has created from that perspective. And then you can learn how to golf, and then you can learn how to create cars, and all of it's going to be worship. And it's this beautiful perspective of everything that we have now, but sin removed. And so I think there'll be ability for somebody to take 10,000 years to learn how to play guitar, because you've got that ability of time, where we're interested and where we find desire to worship Yahweh through creation. It's not going to be this long worship service. Like I said, I'm out. I've got a cap on that. On our weekend services, I'm about 20 minutes. I'm like, I'm done, unless I'm playing drums. And I don't want to play drums for a year, let alone 10,000 years or more. We're going, no, there's going to be room for us to explore all of creation the way it was supposed to be, and to worship God through that. But without the pain, without the suffering, without sin, without humans taking pride and self-promotion through the whole thing, where I think it's just going to be this beautiful picture of doing what we want as an expression of the goodness of God.
That's a great answer. I think if you talk to your 15-year-old and just talk to them about what do you love doing, like what brings you joy, what makes you feel really alive. Imagine that heaven is just full of that, where we will get to be fully alive in a way that the sin and death of this world stops us. from doing now. And we'll get to see other people being fully alive. We'll get to enjoy our siblings, right, without like resenting them or being frustrated by them or whatever. Yeah, I think that the unique abilities, there's probably going to be a bunch of really cool like Spartan courses for the nutheads among us who enjoy running 60 miles at a time.
Hey, with infinite time, everybody will get there eventually and have taken in a Spartan course to the glory of Jesus.
Well,
But Doug will not be able to make us in heaven.
and I've talked about this new body, right? I've mentioned that in a live stream or a podcast somewhere. So maybe I'll be able to do Spartan because I won't get tired. I won't grow weary. There'll be no crying or no pain. This will be perfect.
That will be
Well,
interesting.
what's the fun of Spartan?
Oh, Kyle and Doug will have to find new mountains to master. But yeah, that idea that we'll get to be fully alive. My Oma died a couple months ago. She was 90, and not all of my family would necessarily kind of view faith or belief in God the same way that we would. But it's funny. There were a couple comments on Facebook just that, talking about imagining her doing the things she loved, like beach combing and swimming and hiking mountains with dogs that had passed on before. And just that and as towards the end of her life, one of her great frustrations is that she was mostly limited to sitting in her chair because her eyesight was going. She needed to walk with a walker. Her strength and energy was just going. Her body was just getting tired. She had congestive heart failure, for 4 years. And she felt frustrated because she was such a doer. She was such an active lady. And I think there was that sense that when her spirit left her body, there was great sadness and loss for all of us. There was also a sense of, Oma finally gets to, whether there's some sense, I think, that those that go before us are waiting for the full expression and enjoyment of their new bodies and the new heaven and the new earth with us. Yeah. But there's a sense that also time ceases to exist outside of earth, right? So we can imagine them immediately enjoying unrestrictedly the things that brought greatest joy, because, the way that we're created uniquely reflects aspects of who God is. And that's why I think each of us would probably imagine heaven's enjoyments a little bit differently.
Yeah. I think just collectively, like the things you said, I think I remember one friend that talked about the food all the time. She loves like different ethnic foods, and she's like, when we're all together, there's going to be some good food, right?
Potluck, yes.
But I just think of the community aspect or just the enjoyment aspect. Like you say, like the things we enjoy in life. Like all of us have those moments because I think God is real and his kingdom is here on earth to some extent, right? So there's moments in life where we just feel, wow, like that is good. Like, you've left a place or sitting with people or even on your own where you've just gone, what a fulfilling moment or day, right? Yeah. And I think that to me would probably be a lot what the kingdom of heaven will look like. And when we get there, it'll just be that fulfillment because, like you said, there's no resentment. There's nothing to pull that away from us, right? I think we'll just always be in that peace and joy and hope that God brings all the time. That's my thought anyways.
Yeah. Well, I think the promise from the more I read the last number of years, especially, I'm seeing more and more. There's not this promise of us leaving and going somewhere else. It's a restoration of Eden the way it was supposed to be. And that's been the promise since sin entered the world.
I believe that.
Things are going to be made back to how they were. And the picture that we see is unity of the people with God and with each other and with creation. And that's, I think, a part that regularly gets left out. So our ability to enjoy the world how it was, Adam and Eve still had to cultivate and be in good relationship to expand the garden was the beauty and thing created. Everything was there, even their harmony with animals. Yeah. And one of the first things Jesus does before he begins his ministry is go out to the wilderness where he's at peace. The wilderness is a place of destruction and danger, and Jesus is at peace there in the wilderness. And so even the harmony with animals and with all of creation is going to be restored back, where I think we will have little desire for anything that we can't have. I don't think we will, but I think there's still the beauty of now go and explore and make something of this. That idea of subdue the earth. Horses weren't just tame where you could jump on them and ride, all right? And the ore wasn't coming out of the ground where they could build homes. They still had to go and take those pieces, but the idea of systems taken to let's destroy animals and harvest them and make it so we have this massive food system wasn't there. It was a harmony with the earth as well as with each other, taking care of one another. Oh, you don't have a house? I've got the skills to build a house. Let me help you do that. Like this beautiful just world altogether of unity and peace and harmony, I think is what we're being restored to. And let me teach you how to make Thai food. Let me teach you how to make sourdough bread. Like all those pieces, and this desire to learn more and explore God's creation will be restored again.
Yeah, I think, there won't be trouble as far as like sinful stuff, but I think there's still be, problem solving. I think there'll still be creativity.
Totally.
I think there'll still be, you know, I think that is the things that God has instilled in us and likes, right? And I think we will do that. I think we'll still work. I think we'll still be, achieving things and
Absolutely.
feeling, finding fulfillment in those things. It'll just be less stressful, maybe.
Yeah.
Be a way to say it. I don't know.
Well, Ingrid talked about golf was one of his specific examples because he enjoys golfing but doesn't get to do it as often as he'd like. He's like, heaven would be completely boring if we just go to play golf and we just hit holes in ones all the time.
Right,
He's like,
yeah.
that's not what it's going to be. You're still going to have to master a skill. You're still going to have to take time. You're going to have to learn how to, you may not have your body grow tired and weary, but that doesn't mean you can automatically rock climb and traverse Everest on day one. Like there's still going to be this learning and exploring idea and accomplishing. I like the way you said that.
Yeah.
We were made to do things, not to just be perfect. And we've never seen that in the garden, nor do we see that in the end of Revelation. It's things are made back to how they are for us to go and to enjoy what God made. Yeah.
Which I think is a really fun way to approach the conversation with kids. Like, I think like mine are the ones that are able to talk are 5 and 8, and Eli's could probably have that conversation more curiously and in an engaged way than Joel could. But that idea of, like what, like I think to try and encourage them in the goodness of developing a skill. Like Eli can get really frustrated if he can't do something perfectly the first time.
Yeah.
And just to encourage, to be able to, not that he's asking about heaven yet, but to be able to encourage him in like the goodness of learning a skill and persevering and working at something until you have the satisfaction of, oh, I can do that now. The idea that in heaven we'll just have infinite opportunity to do that. So like you're 8, like don't give up now, because this is not only the rest of your life, but like the rest of eternity. Maybe there's opportunity to keep challenging yourself and enjoy learning new things. Maybe we won't have that. If laziness is a sin of the flesh, maybe that won't be a besetting temptation in heaven. But that, and also the what did you say about? There's my thought train just totally derailed. Practicing new things, kids. Jeepers.
I'll jump in as you're thinking.
Yeah,
there.
please do.
I was just going to say, the one thought I always like is just the idea too that God is way beyond me, right?
Yeah.
And I do like. I went through a season of life where I was studying other religions a lot because personally I want to know, like, do I have the right one? Like I was born here and my parents raised me Christian. Somebody else in the world was born there and raised Muslim or
Right.
Hindu or whatever else they were.
Yeah.
How come I'm right and they're wrong or whatever else? So I spent a lot of time, figuring out my faith.
Yeah.
But one thing that I found very curious in a lot of religions is that their paradise or their heaven is more thought out than the Christian one is. That it has parameters and it has, this is what it's going to be.
Yeah.
And I've always thought, interesting that it's, as good as a human can think, that's as good as it gets.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't want that one.
Yeah.
I want the one where as good as God thinks is the one I'm going to, right? Which is way better than I can imagine,
Yeah.
right? So, yeah,
Totally.
I get excited about that.
That's
Yeah.
a cool thought. And I found my thought train.
Hey, there you go.
I think in trying to communicate to our kids, like when they're experiencing something really good, but there's a, I think like kids are almost immediately old enough to feel this is good, but I wish for something more, or, but this isn't quite right. Or, they can just get overtired and a great hour ends up in a meltdown, and just to be able to, when they're old enough, communicate, hey, like, when they're asking about heaven, even the best things that we get to experience now, whether it's like winning the sports series with your team or mastering that skill or winning a race or whatever it is, finishing the best book, that pang that you have, that longing that says, but I still want, like, I'm not totally satisfied. That's because we're created we are created ultimately to just live in God's presence, fully aware of that. And there's that part of just doing it with Him that satisfies that deepest hunger and longing. And we don't get to experience the fullness of that here, but in heaven, right, where Jesus teaches us that we will see God face to face, that we'll get to enjoy that with Him. And His presence there will fill in that missing bit. So, you know, there's lots of complicated theological terms for that, but to help kids understand like that we can look forward to that bit that we're missing is God teaching us to long for Him here.
Yeah. I think the other side of that coin, oh, sorry, go Blake. Go
I
ahead.
was just going to say, I like that theological term, the missing bit. That's pretty good, Melissa.
I think C.S. Lewis called it Senschutz or some German.
No, I'm all right with that. That totally makes sense to me.
I think on the other side of that same coin, where my head's going to is there's no rush to do anything either, right? And sometimes there's that moment of this can't last as long as I'd like it to.
Yeah.
'Cause I got to get through this book now so I can make supper or whatever, or I need to educate my kid this fast because he needs to be ready by 18 to stand on his own 2 feet so he can get out and make money and have a good job. There'll be no rush of that, right? Like to stop and enjoy the good things. Or if we're teaching somebody who doesn't know anything yet, and they're like, you know what, I'm just sick of this. There won't, whether we're having kids or not in heaven, obviously that won't be there. But the idea of like no need to rush through this system of we've got to teach you to read by such and such a date, because like I don't want to do that right now. All right, let's go play. And there's no rush because there's not this big system of you got to get on your own 2 feet so you can be taking care of yourself by then, because there's this beautiful harmony. I think the time to enjoy things will also help a little bit of that pang of we just need to rush through this right now.
Yes.
That I think will be gone.
And I think that, like what I think maybe something you said like 7 minutes ago, but could help remove some anxiety that even for adults, like I think a lack, like an underdeveloped view of heaven can feed a lot of that like driving hunger in us that can cause us to just to lose what's most important or rival people or other things in order to fulfill our own goals. Because if we think this is the only life I have to travel the world and climb Mount Kilimanjaro and all those things, you know, and if our biggest love is traveling and seeing different parts of God's creation, but we think this is our only chance to do it. Whereas, you know, Jesus does give us this picture that heaven is a restored earth. And if we could envision that, I mean, we don't know exactly, but what if this earth was remade, restored to its fullness, and, you know, we hadn't just extracted all the goodness out of it and, you know, the dying coral reefs and all that. If everything was restored to its original kind of glory and, you know, we had like hundreds of years to go and hike different parts of the world and explore, you know, different things that we may not get to if we choose contentment or I don't know, we all have limited capacity. I know it's something that can drive me nuts. But if we say, okay, God, you've given me this space and these people and this life, and that's going to mean that if I do this well, I'm not going to be able to live 5 other lives now, but maybe there might be a chance to see and explore more of what you've created. That's kind of fun.
Yeah, totally. And those 2 books that I mentioned, they were very clear. There's very little, if almost no, talk about the afterlife in the Old Testament whatsoever. That wasn't the focus. Is what we can do with this life. And even Jesus, he talks about the afterlife a little bit more than the Old Testament does, but not nearly as much as in the idea of off there and then. He talks about the kingdom being brought here now, and creation being restored way more than he does heaven off in the distance. And I think even how this question has been phrased, the idea of telling others about Jesus now and what we get to do in heaven, almost answers itself of, I have one life to show the goodness and the way of Jesus here, and I have all of eternity to explore the goodness of the world and the creation with him later. It almost flips those priorities into their proper order. I have this life, and I can enjoy hiking, and I can enjoy food and all those pieces a little bit now, but forever there. But I have this one opportunity to display the way, which is the way the New Testament church referred to following Christ. This is the way now. And the way of hope, the way of joy, the way of being a peacemaker, not just enjoying peace, but being a peacemaker in this world. We have one opportunity to do that. And I think let's do that now well and taste the full goodness of heaven for eternity with Christ in the new creation.
Yeah, well said.
And it's the way of the cross, right? Is the way of laying our life down for others. And for all of us, it's going to look different. Some
Yeah.
of us can do that while traveling the world, but
Yeah.
for all of us, saying yes to Jesus and laying our life down for others so that they will see
Yeah.
who God really is
Yeah.
and have a chance to come to his heart
Yeah.
will mean saying no to some of those desires or things that we would otherwise just really want to pursue
Yeah.
first.
Which I could probably speak for all of us. I'll just speak for myself, but that's really hard to do. I really do enjoying this life.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's so hard for me to regularly lay my life down, but that's what we see in Jesus.
Yeah.
Even his physical possessions, the Son of Man has no place to lay his head, didn't have those physical possessions because his whole life, now he's Jesus, but at the same time, he displays and asks us regularly to lay our lives down for others, and I think that's what he had in mind. We'll have all of time for the new creation. Right now, I need you to get this. Right now, I need you to see this piece. And it's difficult, and I'm by no means even good at it, let alone great at it. But it's just that good reminder. So I've really appreciated this conversation.
Yeah, it's been
on this
fun.
one.
Hopefully it leads to more questions that you guys can answer in following weeks.
Yeah, and we'll invite you back for those. That's all of our questions this week. And if you have more coming out of that, or if anything else on your mind, we'd love to hear those from you. And you can shoot your questions into questions@livingspringsairtree.com, or right on our website, livingspringsairtree.com/ask. You can send those in, and or text the number through both those ways, and we'll get those from you. Thanks, guys, and we'll see you next week.
See you later.
Bye-bye.